Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, a spate of school children kidnappings spreads fear in northern Nigeria.
And that has heaped more pressure on the government after US President Donald Trump threatened military action over the alleged persecution of Christians in Nigeria.
Why attacks like these have the US president threatening to intervene in what he calls a Christian genocide. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey everyone, as you're watching today's show, leave us a comment telling us what you think about the security situation in Nigeria or the headlines around this story. And if you're listening to this interview on your podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from and a 5-star rating. It helps other people discover the show. Thanks.
I am Yinka Adegoke. I am the Africa editor for Semafor, a digital publication based in New York and Washington, D.C.
Yinka, welcome to The Take. Now, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has ordered a total security cordon with intensified aerial surveillance over parts of 3 states in the north central and northwestern part of Nigeria. And that's because there have been several devastating security incidents in the span of about a week. Gunmen abducted 25 girls from a mostly Muslim school in the state of Kebbi. 38 people were kidnapped for ransom at a church in Kwara State, and then more than 300 people, students and teachers, were taken from a Catholic school in the northwest state of Niger. Now, there's no evidence that these incidents are connected at all, but they brought renewed scrutiny to Nigeria's security issues. So what are you hearing from people there? What is the latest as far as you know?
Well, the latest that we know is that there's obviously an intense effort to get people to come back, to get them back. We had news that 24 of the girls from that school have been returned home. There's a lot of concern because these kidnappings or these attacks haven't been happening with a frequency as they've happened in the last week and a half.
Yeah. Well, for that reason, what did you think? What went through your mind immediately when you read the headlines or when you heard from people in Nigeria?
The obvious thing is that it comes so soon after the US President Donald Trump had made this claim that there was a Christian genocide going on in Nigeria. And I've been speaking to people in Nigeria over the last few days that it was almost as if people who were behind these acts were responding to the claims by Trump. Now, to be clear, Christians and Muslims have been killed in Nigeria. This is a real issue of insecurity across the country. It's a real concern. And actually, what's happened over the last few years is that it's become less about religion and just about a general state of insecurity. And that's really been the big concern for, everyday Nigerians, particularly those who are in more vulnerable sub-regions of the country.
Yeah. Okay, well, I definitely want to dive into Trump's comments and how that's reverberating, but I want to linger on that good news that you raised just a little bit earlier because it's so hard to find good news in news like this. So that is that the president announced on Tuesday that 24 of the 25 girls who were abducted by armed assailants from the school in Kebbi were rescued. And one of the girls had previously escaped. So that means all 25 are safe. And about 50 of the students who were kidnapped from St. Mary's, that's the Catholic school in Niger State, managed to escape. But that's where the good news ends. About 250 are still being held. I want to play a little clip from one of the fathers of one of those who was taken. This is Michael Ibrahim. His son was taken.
There is no one we can trust other than the government. We're in the bush, and we don't have anyone else to help us. Our only hope can come from them. If they don't help us, they will be failing us. After what happened, if the government doesn't help us, there is nothing else we can do.
So Yinka, Where can the families of those who are abducted turn for help? What help is there?
This is the big issue, right, with Nigeria, that this is about insecurity in general, because you have no choice. So this is what people have been talking to me about in the last few days, which is just, we need the government to be more engaged, take this more seriously, because if nothing else has come out from this last week, it is that the government has been made to look, frankly, incompetent to have allowed things to get to this point, where people could just turn up and decide to kidnap one, literally on order, right? That seems to be the situation we're in.
Yeah. Well, while we don't know who is responsible for these attacks, the reports are calling them bandits and armed assailants and gunmen. We do know there are a number of armed groups in the region. But again, we cannot link those two things. People haven't even claimed responsibility for many of these attacks, and a ransom has not been asked for some of them. What do we know? What does that tell you?
I'm glad you brought up the points about the lack of a ransom being mentioned. One of the questions people I was speaking to in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, is the question of the fact that like, how are these people even being released? As you just said, no one has made a claim as to having taken these children. No one has mentioned anything about a ransom, right? And then it's just suddenly people are free from, negotiations and pressure. And if you watch one of the videos that's out there now, you could probably find it on social media, where the girls, as they're about to be released, the people who kidnapped them, whoever they are making the point of making the girls say, the government didn't rescue you. They're literally trying to point out that, well, we negotiated with some important people and we're going to let them go. Right?
Yeah.
So what's really troubling about that is, so they could just do this again whenever it suits them. You don't get a sense that people are any safer. And that's a real concern, that this can just go on and on and on. We could just be in this cycle where unknown people kidnap children.
So you mentioned the videos and images of the rescue, and the president and some of his advisors are posting those on X. And it's interesting because, just like you said, so under the president's tweet, one of his tweets announcing that the schoolgirls abducted in Kebbi State have been safely rescued, you see several people say, how? They seem like they're calling for transparency. One person says, they weren't simply handed over as victims out of goodwill. What happened? Will we ever get answers?
It's just very strange that there has been no transparency. They've just not been straightforward about this. And it just creates, an opportunity for conspiracy theories as to what's going on here. All sorts of things about, it's other political players are involved, or you'd want them to be transparent to avoid the worst kind of conspiracy theories getting out there, which just actually cause more insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Well, Yinka, as you referenced earlier, these attacks come just after U.S. President Donald Trump placed Nigeria on something called the Country of Particular Concern lists, accusing the government of not doing enough to protect Christians. On November 5th, Trump released a video on social media.
If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria.
On Friday, he was on U.S. conservative personality Brian Kilmeade's radio show, and he used the word genocide to describe the violence.
Nigeria is a disgrace. The whole thing is a disgrace. They're killing people by the thousands. It's a genocide, and I'm really angry about it.
What do you make of Trump's rhetoric?
I think what's interesting about it is to bring in another country here. It's very similar to what happened with South Africa, right? It's like this very bombastic sort of language, which just pushes down a narrative which is more focused on conservative American conservative talking points, things that Americans care about. But American conservatives are really concerned about ideas that tie into persecution of Christians, persecution, in the case of South Africa, of white minorities. These are just ideas that move around in those circles, and they, create all sorts of conspiracies around. So Nigeria's got caught up in this same thing, and this stuff has been coming for Nigeria for a little while. This whole idea of Christian genocide, Christians are being persecuted, has been in the ether for a while. It then just gradually over time became a mainstream talking point via some congressman, the senator with Ted Cruz, and eventually it got to Donald Trump himself. Now, as usual with these things, there's always some truth to it. It's not that nothing has ever happened to any Christians, but it's the idea of persecution specifically against Nigerian Christians is just not true.
More with Yinka after the break. As you alluded, President Trump is not the only one, and it didn't start with him, because referring to the violence in northern Nigeria as only targeting Christians has been happening in the U.S. for a few years now. So Texas Senator Ted Cruz, you mentioned, he's blamed the Nigerian government for Christian mass murder, and he introduced the Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act of 2025. And then we had a perhaps unlikely character in all of this, the rap icon Nicki Minaj. She spoke about it at the UN.
In Nigeria, Christians are being targeted, driven from their homes, and killed. Churches have been burned. Families have been torn apart, and entire communities live in fear constantly, simply because of how they pray.
But this language isn't just coming from the U.S. and U.S. Christians. The Christian Association of Nigeria on Monday called for a one-day nationwide prayer against Christian genocide. So break this down for us. Is there evidence to suggest that Christians in Nigeria are facing something that other groups aren't?
I think it's such a sensitive topic, and one has to be very careful, right? So Christians have been killed in Nigeria by whether they're Islamists or they're just called bandits. That definitely has happened. But the fact that so much of this happens in the more sparsely populated parts of the country, which are often in the north of Nigeria, the fact that the Islamists themselves originate in the north of Nigeria means many more Muslims have been impacted by these attacks, right? By displacement, by what have you. So, yes, like I said, you have to be careful how you say it, not to make it seem like this is not happening, it's all made up. This is not all made up. And the Nigerian government, in their defense, are very sensitive to this, right? Because they understand that once you start to frame topics in this way, these are the kinds of things that, when it's done along ethnic grounds, has led to a civil war. Once you start to talk in these ways, there are ramifications to this, that some of which they can't control if it really takes off.
Well, in response to the accusations of Christian genocide, President Tinubu issued a statement saying, "The characterization of Nigeria as religiously intolerant does not reflect our national reality." How else is the Nigerian government pushing back? And do you think that they are doing it well enough?
No, I don't think the Nigerian government has done a good job on this. I think what tends to happen is it tends to be sort of a reactive positioning rather than thinking strategically, planning in advance, being thoughtful. Yeah, sure, Donald Trump will say what he's going to say anytime, but there's no one to negotiate with on the Nigerian behalf because there's no ambassador in Washington, D.C. And not only is there no ambassador, they have no lobbyists on their behalf, so speaking to people on Capitol Hill. And this is what you need to do. You're a major country on the African continent. You need to be engaged with the world's largest economy, the most powerful country on the planet. You just need to be engaged.
Well, Yinka, if Nigerian officials are not walking the halls of the U.S. Congress or being invited into the White House to have these conversations, they perhaps are using other avenues, because Gimba Kakanda, a senior special assistant to President Tinubu, wrote an op-ed for Al Jazeera. Maybe not have quite the same cachet with the White House, but he wrote this op-ed for Al Jazeera called "No Bilmar, There is No Christian Genocide in Nigeria." And he was calling out the comedian and talk show host who earlier this year said that was what was happening in Nigeria was so much more of a genocide attempt than what is going on in Gaza. And in this op-ed, you have Kakanda arguing that saying this violence is a Christian genocide is retaliation for Nigeria supporting Palestine. Can you walk us through that?
I wish I could. I find it. I think it's a bit of a stretch, right? I mean, plenty of countries have commented on the situation in Gaza. I don't think Nigeria's stands out in some sort of unusual fashion. Now, South Africa could make a claim like that because they actually went much further and took Israel to the Human Rights Court. But Nigeria hasn't done anything that exceptional in this situation. I mean, listen, it was a decent op-ed, but you should have lobbyists in DC to make sure your voice is being heard. One of the things in the story I wrote a couple of weeks ago that was clear when you looked at the lobbying files was that when you search Nigeria, the only people lobbying with regards to Nigeria were Biafra separatists who were pushing this Christian genocide argument. And they're pushing their argument because they realized, they worked out that, okay, maybe no one on Capitol Hill cares about the issue of Biafra or what have you. But if we say that because we're a predominantly Christian sub-region of the country, that we're being targeted because we're Christian, someone will pick it up. And it worked. And it worked, right? And this very small group, ragtag group, managed to outwit the entire Nigerian government.
Well, Yinka, I want to bring us back to the underlying security crisis that's at the heart of this, because it is hard to have this conversation without thinking of the massive Bring Back Our Girls campaign that was so big in 2014. It followed the kidnapping of 276 girls from a secondary school in Chibok in northeastern Nigeria.
For these mothers in northern Nigeria, still desperate to get their daughters back, the grief is raw and matched by rising anger. They came together to press the government to find the more than 270 schoolgirls snatched by Boko Haram nearly a month ago.
I covered it extensively, and I just remember the sadness, really, of the attack and of the not knowing. 11 years later, 90 of these girls are still missing. So I wonder, what has the Nigerian government done in the years since to protect people in that part of the country? Do people feel like some progress has been made?
I'm afraid they haven't done very much. I mean, until this last week, they weren't kidnapping school children every week or what have you. But all that's happened is the insecurity kind of evolved. So it moved away from the sort of, explicitly Islamist kind of framing, right? To just like bandits, unknown bandits, and now people kidnapping for ransom. Because remember then, if you covered the story well, it wasn't really about ransom. It was just, you could make a case. They were actually arguing on principle. We do not want anyone to go to school. Why are these girls going to, you know what I mean? That was kind of their, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah.
It was a kind of a principle. Now people just, it's like some sort of sub-industry for people, for these criminals, I should say. And that again still leaves us in the same position, ironically, as it was back then. You can call it terrorism, or you can call it banditry, or you can call it whatever, but it's still about a lack of security in the country for just ordinary Nigerians, vulnerable people. There is a general lack of security in so many parts of the country, you know, the president has talked about expanding the police force and what have you, but they're going to need to do a lot more, think a lot more strategically, as well as the underlying economic issues.
Mhm. Well, finally, Yinka, I want to end with the framing, as you put it earlier, because I wonder if the threats of military action from the U.S. president to go in and protect the Christians in Nigeria and the rhetoric of Christian genocide do anything to either help or hurt the overall security situation on the ground for people who have to live this day to day in Nigeria.
Well, I have seen several, as you said earlier about the Christian Association of Nigeria and several other Christian leaders, sort of on Fox News and what have you, or American channels, talking about how terrible things are and sort of bringing awareness. And listen, people should be able to bring awareness on it if it has to be done on a global stage in order to get the Nigerian government to pay attention. They're going to have to do that, right? I do not blame them at all for wanting to do that. All this to say, on some level, maybe Trump bringing this up, and even if he's framed it slightly in an exaggerated fashion, there could be something good to come out of it, maybe. But it really is about a long-term insecurity issue. Because if you think about it, they could send the Nigerian military out there and kill a bunch of people and do some stuff. But if you aren't thinking about this strategically and planning and, investing in not just with money, but investing in training people and ensuring people are safe and all the rest of it, it's just keep on happening over again. It'll just be a cycle. And we'll be back here, just like we're back here 11 years after you were covering the Chibok girls. We're back here in 11 years' time talking about the same thing, right? But if they're not thinking strategically about it, how do we keep everyday Nigerians safe, regardless of their religion, regardless of their geographical location in the country? That's the biggest issue. That's the thing that needs to be fixed.
Yeah. Yinka, thank you for walking us through this difficult and, as you said, nuanced conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.